This week, we discuss benchmarking yourself as a photographer and setting goals for the new year ahead. You are listening to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas Albert, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about reflection, growth, and planning out the year ahead. This is something that I do each year that I believe really helps me to better understand where I am on my journey as a photographer and where I'm going. It guides my planning, approach, and process in the new year. I do this as a form of self-calibration. It's a way to benchmark myself and see where I am so that I can continue to grow and learn. The key is to always keep learning, accomplish your goals, and then create new goals for yourself. One thing that stood out to me early on in my journey as a photographer was this question: how do you effectively assess your progress as a landscape photographer? I needed a few years to develop a system that worked for me, but continuous improvement was always a priority. So creating a functional system was crucial because I recognized I needed it for my own growth. I'm a process-oriented individual, methodical and balanced. As I went through this journey of reflection again in 2024, I realized others might be seeking a way to do the same thing. So I want to share my approach to this, and if it ends up helping you to build your own process, or if you want to go through the same exact process, that's awesome. Now, this is a personal journey of reflection and introspection that fosters growth, direction, and goal setting ahead. This is not being overly critical of yourself, though. We are not encouraging self-doubt or looking at things as failures. As a matter of fact, take that word out of your vocabulary as it pertains to this. There is no such thing as a failure, only a learning opportunity. You want to consider where you are technically and process-wise and use what you find as motivation for improvement. You want to look at your work, your goals, your accomplishments, your learning opportunities, basically look at everything as a whole and use what you find to evaluate where you are and where you want to be. I've always considered reflection as my compass and what's revealed as my map. When I first started in photography, I always embraced the saying, be better than who you were yesterday. As simplistic as it is, it still delivers a powerful message, and it's what I want to start this entire episode off with. Focus on you, your craft, and your experience in nature first. Never compete with others, strangers, whatever. Just focus on you and what you need to do to improve. Inviting competition into your life brings nothing but stress, chaos, frustration. Photography is entirely about your state of mind and the joy of being in nature. Don't allow competition to diminish that. Whether it's something within you or within those around you, cut that out of your life, keep it at a safe distance. Of course, healthy competition is one thing, and that's a whole other discussion. I'm speaking specifically to competitiveness out of spite or trying too hard for the wrong reasons, people forcing work because they have to be first. Maybe it's a toxic social media group or people with an elitist mindset. Just avoid all that. Photography is purely about the enjoyment of being present in places that inspire us and put us in a positive state of mind. Shared with friends and those who want to see you succeed and do better, it makes the experience that much better. As we explore this together, remember this: setting a benchmark is not simply counting your best shots and telling yourself you're going to double it next year. Reflection is about looking at your process, your inspiration, your keepers, your missed shots, the processing, the gear, down to your own artistic vision and what contributes to that vision. This is all about identifying patterns, challenges, and opportunities for growth. A growth mindset helps you build good habits, grow as a person, feel more positive and just overall better about yourself, and it helps you do your best work. Every December, I sit down and look through my photos, noting what I like and what I don't. I call December my benchmark month. I don't shoot much during this time and use it as an opportunity for reflection and introspection. It is a way for me to track what I did throughout the year and allows me to evaluate where I am, where I want to be, and what I need to do to keep improving. I review my goals for that year and assess whether I achieved them or still need to work on them. I ask myself what worked, what didn't, and why. I break this down into 5 major categories and consider each individually, and then at the end, I look at them as a whole and try to figure out how they relate. These major categories are inspiration, the keepers, the duds, post-processing, and the gear. Considering these 5 elements helps to guide my process throughout the rest of the year, helping me decide what I need to do to build upon what I have learned, where I still need work, and refine myself, my process, and my equipment. The first thing I'm going to look at is inspiration and how that translates into my artistic vision. In order to figure out if I met my goals over the course of the year, I need to know what the driving force was behind them. What was my foundation? This can certainly look different for everyone, and it probably will. This is my process and approach to fine-tuning that aspect of my work and digging deeper into the why behind the what. I'm looking at 4 areas specifically and what they mean to me during this process. The first is places. I'm asking myself, am I going to the places that inspire me? Am I connected to the places that I'm going? At any point, did I feel disconnected to a place? And if so, why? The second is knowledge and understanding. I want to understand the history of an area, the geology. I want to understand these things on a deeper level than just looking at them on the surface and saying, that's a rock or that's a barn. Well, of course it is. But why is it significant? The third is photographers and photographs. I'm considering whose work inspired me this year and why was it inspiring? And the other piece of that is, did I translate any of that into my own work? And then finally, the fourth is state of mind. Did I surround myself with people who inspired me, motivated me, and fostered a positive source of inspiration? Did I take the proper personal steps and maintain a positive state of mind for myself? And then I'm looking at what my overall state of mind throughout the year was, and was it conducive to positive, healthy results in my process? As I go through these questions, I'm considering the fundamentals of my process from start to finish. I'm looking for the who, what, where, when, and why behind my work and what I did that year. These are critical aspects that we want to understand. This is the basis of our work. We want to look at these so we can continue building the positives and working on those areas of opportunity. I'm going to break each of these down a little further so you know exactly what I'm considering as I'm going through this process. As I consider places, I'm thinking about where I spent my time that year. Was I exploring new areas? Was I returning to places that inspired me and influenced my artistic choices? We need to be traveling to the places that inspire us and speak to us. Places that push us to create our best work. If you're burned out on a location, you're not very likely to create great images there. Even worse, you're going to slip into that state of mind that causes a cycle to erupt, leading you to desperation and just a creative rut. If you start feeling that way, it's always time to switch things up. I've been there before, more than a few times, returning to a place repeatedly, only to realize that I'm not inspired. You arrive and you immediately begin asking yourself, what are you even doing there? And that flood of doubt rushes in. In 2024, I told myself at the beginning of the year that I wanted to shoot one location well. I went against my own instincts. I went against that anxiety, and I wanted to dedicate my year to one area, learn it, live it, and see it under all conditions and seasons as I prepared for fall color. Initially, I had some reservations about this and thought I was going to burn myself out, and hate it by the time fall rolled around. But I ultimately dedicated my year to the Porcupine Mountains and hiking the many trails in the park. I wanted to see as much as possible and push myself further each time. To get over that fear of being burned out, what I did is I set a discovery goal and a return goal for myself, discovering one new location each trip and returning to a location I had already been to on each trip. That combination of goals allowed me to explore the area while staying focused on seeing it under different conditions, light, and seasons. As I went through the process, I learned a lot about myself, the park, and its many beautiful areas. Instead of trying to fit a dozen locations into a single trip, I balanced locations across trips and focused on giving myself time to see each location that interested me. I wanted to discover it, not just simply see it. I wanted to experience its many moods, conditions, and see how it changed throughout the year. I used this as a guide leading up to the big fall color show in October. This does not have to be as big of a commitment for you. Don't think that you have to dedicate your year to an entire park or a single area. This can be as simple as returning to one location that you've struggled with in the past, but really want to just shoot well. Or a set of locations that are nearby one another that inspire you, but you know that there's that one specific shot that you know is there, and you want to seek that shot out. For me, focusing on one area helped me tremendously, and it's actually something that I'm planning to do again in 2025 as well. Challenging yourself to get the not so obvious shot or see the location under a wide range of conditions and light will help you recognize a unique shot when you see it. That's why places are so important. Next up, I'm looking at photographers and photographs. I'm asking myself, who inspired me? Whose work spoke to me? What styles of work caught my attention and influenced my artistic vision? We are all inspired by each other's work. My images may inspire some of you, while at the same time, I'm inspired by other people's images and the cycle continues on and on. Borrowed ideas and techniques translate into your own work from someone else who already borrowed them. Now, I'm not saying go out and copy somebody else's work. Of course, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, but going out with the sole intention of copying a scene differs from going out intending to craft a scene that speaks to you. Trying to get the exact tripod position, focal length, camera settings, and basically match a composition as closely as possible, in my opinion, is just going too far. At that point, for me personally at least, I feel I'm there solely for the image and not necessarily the experience. I'm not letting the location speak to me, I'm just there to copy the way the scene spoke to someone else. And for me, I feel like that's doing myself a disservice. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to this. One example is the Lake of the Clouds overlook. There's really only a handful of ways to photograph it effectively. Without drones or a magic carpet, there's probably about a dozen compositions there. But the point is, looking at who inspired you and how that translated into your own work is a big part of your growth. You have to be inspired by something to get out there and create meaningful images. This goes deeper than just looking at an image and saying, wow, look at that location. I should go there too. When I find inspiration in an image, I'm studying it. I'm asking myself, what is it about the image that speaks to me? I consider the light, the composition, the elements of the scene, the photographer's choice regarding line, form, scale, and texture, the direction and quality of the light, the scene's movement and energy, the conditions under which the photographer took the image, all the way down to shutter speed, focal length, even ISO and depth of field. I'm asking myself how the sum of the parts adds up to the overall emotion and mood of the scene and the story that's being told. Because my intention is to draw a goal from it and then get out there and deliberately practice incorporating and translating that into my work. For example, Friend and fellow photographer Carl Wertinen shoots long exposure waterfalls and does an excellent job of using bubbles in the water as lines in the outflow. These lines guide the viewer's eye right into the scene, emphasizing the subject and the forms of the water features. Noticing that in his images, I was practicing incorporating that into my own in 2024. Another friend and fellow photographer, Neil Weaver, does a fantastic job of representing energy, light, and flow in a scene. His scenes are dynamic and detailed, exemplifying the qualities of the landscape and the story being told. From small scenes with textures and light to larger scenes with moving water or shoreline, you can really feel that energy in the scene. This led me to experiment more with shutter speed in 2024, looking for the changes in energy, mood, and emotion in my own images. It's these qualities of storytelling in an image that I'm looking to discover and build upon in my own work. I'm always exclusively looking for the technical details in others' work. I'm not just looking simply to copy their shot. When I say draw inspiration from others' photos, this is what I mean. Look at their work, study it, ask yourself what elements make it stand out to you, and start translating it into your own work. It's the technical details that tell the story, after all. Now, this all builds toward your state of mind. Photography is entirely about getting inspired, getting into that flow state of mind, and living into the experience. For me, photography has always been about sharing the moments that define my adventures in nature. A nature first, photo second approach, if you will. Approaching trips and adventures with this perspective has helped me tremendously over the years. The reason being, I'm not expecting shots or setting my expectations too high. I'm focused on the experience. This approach allows me to shift my focus from image creation to landscape discovery as my adventure unfolds. For me, this has always come fairly naturally. I don't have a drive to produce work. I have a drive to explore unknown places and discover the landscape. As funny as it might sound, I actually look forward to eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich next to a waterfall that is seldom seen or visited, or having a victory lunch on top of a ridge that's rarely traversed. It's the little things that make the experience worthwhile, not the images I'm producing. If I focused only on producing work, the entire trip would just be stressful and I would just simply never enjoy it. This all forms your state of mind and the balance and flow of your artistic vision. When I look back over my year, I'm thinking about moments where I might have tried to do too much and ended up stressing myself out, or moments where I was trying to force images and just reflecting on how that affected me and my process. I'm looking at this as cause and effect and how I can avoid moments like these again in the future. For instance, last year in July, I lost an entire day because I was focused on producing work. I was hiking late in the evening, making my way to Barraga Falls. It was my first time there, and against my better judgment, I hiked to it in low light, under poor conditions, and worse yet, I decided to hike the river instead of using the trail. I did end up finding the waterfall, but I ultimately ended up disliking every shot I took of it. And what's worse, as I left the waterfall, I ended up hurting myself and walked out with a pretty bad spine injury. While I was in a rush, I had fallen and landed wrong, and I caused a disc in my lower back to slip. It was just miserable. I made the hike back out, despite it being incredibly painful, but the next morning, I was in so much pain I couldn't even move. I ended up sitting at camp all day, laying in the back of my car, hoping for a miracle, and realizing that all of this came about from being in a rush to produce images. By ignoring my better judgment and deciding that producing work was more important than safely exploring an area and taking my time, it unfolded into this series of unfortunate events. Ultimately, it took me 4 months to recover from that. Extreme pain limited my activities in my October trip. I ended up needing to see a specialist, and they did some injections to my spine. It worked. I'm happy to report that I'm back in action, but the point stands: when you focus on producing images first, sometimes you take risks or you rush through shots and hikes, and it just never has a positive outcome. It all comes down to your state of mind. This, again, will most likely look different for many people, and that's okay. Maybe work stresses you out, or you're anxious about your first trip to a new area. Maybe you have some problems in your personal life that are causing you to lose your focus. Whatever the case might be, finding that inner calm and peace is essential to producing quality work. As I look back over my year, I want to reflect on these moments, my state of mind, the cause and effect, and look for ways that I can avoid them in the upcoming year. Maintaining that positive, flow state of mind is critical for a successful and enjoyable trip. Go to the places that inspire you, and go there for the experience first. Don't try to fit too much into one trip. Don't fit too many places into one day. Leave your worries and stresses behind and just keep exploring and discovering the landscape as your main priority. Focus on the positives, the new adventure, and let it become who you are while you're out there on the trails. In my experience, this has meant the difference between coming home with quality images and coming home with forced images or shots that just never really feel quite complete. And one thing that I do to help foster this state of mind is focus on what I know about an area and that learning piece. Knowledge is power. That might be learning about the history, the geology, geography, or even the biogeology of an area. Knowing more about the story of a location or region helps me feel closer to it and connected with it. You can compare it to building a friendship with a stranger. The more you understand the person, the closer you become. Over the years, my focus has mainly been on the history of the regions that I travel to, particularly the Upper Peninsula, northern Wisconsin, and Lake Superior. In 2025, I want to look more at the diversity of the region, and I've actually shifted my focus to learning about the geology of the Upper Peninsula. I'll admit, I know very little about geology. Much of what I've learned over the years has been through discussing the topic with peers and others that know more than I do. It's a great way to learn, but it's that curiosity and drive to always learn more and grow. A fascination with learning more about the things that I understand little about. Whether it be from books or other people or even a combination of the two, it's identifying topics that relate to what you're passionate about and incorporating them into the process. This is a big point of my reflection process each year, asking myself, what do I actually know about the places that inspire me? What am I doing to learn more about them? And what can I do to learn more about them? This entire process is about growth and learning after all, building upon what we've learned about ourselves, our process, and our work. This is one of those outside inputs that helps influence that process. I can't tell you how many times I've read about the history of an area and been so inspired that I just immediately planned a trip. When you get there, you already have an established connection to that place. Some of my favorite images have actually come about in this way. It's part of the desktop recon process that we're going to be talking about in a future episode. The main point here is learning more about the areas that inspire you and making sure that you are continuing to grow and make your adventures that much more rewarding. Now, once I've considered my sources of inspiration, I want to look at the results. This is where I move into my portfolio images. As I look through them, I'm considering my technical growth and comparing myself to where I was the previous year. I'm looking at my work subjectively and objectively, considering how last year's goals affected and changed my planning process, my approach, my artistic vision, my field craft, and my end results. These are the positives that we want to embrace and make a note of. These are the habits and qualities that we want to build upon and refine further to keep that momentum going. I take my favorite images and I ask myself, What makes these stand out? Is it the light, the conditions, the composition? For example, I took one of my favorite images of the year at Gabbro Falls last spring. It's a photo of a tree just enshrouded in fog, with morning light pouring over the treetops. Just a beautiful, dreamlike moment. A close second is another shot taken on the same trip of Union Bay at sunset, with brilliant storm clouds catching light overhead. I'm going to include both of the photos in the Facebook group so that you guys can see them too, if you're curious. But I ask myself, what makes these two shots so unique? As I look at them, it was a combination of light and conditions. I then want to take it a step further and reflect on compositional choices, subject placement, and evaluate the image by the sum of its parts. I'm looking to see how I used line, form, scale, shape, texture, all those different contributing elements. I want to see how I used it to tell the story or emphasize the subject. In the tree image, for example, I centered the tree in the photograph, making it the obvious subject and the most powerful element in the scene. It worked well for that shot and tells a straightforward story. In the sunset shot, I used leading lines to take the eye right out into Lake Superior and up towards the colorful sky. Their unique characteristics, compositional choices, light, and conditions contribute to the quality of the images. This tells me that I'm getting my favorite images from unique weather phenomena and allowing the light to guide my compositional and subject choices. It's important because when I look back onto my goals coming from 2023 into 2024, one of them was letting the light speak and allowing it to lead my creative choices. You don't need perfect light and conditions to make great photos. Many times, it's simply creativity over circumstances. Trusting your instincts to create something meaningful, even if the conditions, the light, the settings aren't perfect. You simply need to rely on your own creativity and vision to see you through. Approaching every situation this way allows you to see the creativity where others might see obstacles. These shots lived into that, and I think I did a pretty good job of living into that goal. I don't want to mislead you though. Even though I consider these photos a win, I want to keep working on this goal in 2025. I forged the basis of this goal, letting the light speak, in lessons learned over the years. I quickly learned that the shot you envision is often pretty different from the shot presented to you. Allowing the light to speak to you and reveal its qualities is huge. Knowing what to shoot, where to shoot, and what subjects work under different lighting conditions is always going to be a deciding factor in all images. This is another topic for a future episode, but something I at least wanted to touch on here too. The point of this step in the reflection process is to really gauge where you are at in your finished pieces. Are there things that you would have done a little differently looking at the final image? Or are there aspects of the images that you can improve upon? Taking the same two images into account, I ask myself the same questions. In the tree shot, for example, I really like the mood and emotion of the scene, but I realized after the fact that I lost some detail in the brighter areas of the fog. I probably could have stopped down the exposure just a little bit to get a little bit more detail in there. And the shoreline shot, I could have brought the camera up just a little bit because if you look in the center midground of the image, there's a rock that's breaking the shoreline's leading line out toward the sunset. These little details add up to the overall quality and feel of the image. I still like them and they're still some of my personal favorites. However, just because they made it into my portfolio doesn't mean that I'm 100% satisfied with them. But this is part of that subjective and objective process that you have to develop with your own work. Of course, a third-party portfolio review would be another way to accomplish this as well, but the value of that is something that you really have to decide for yourself. As I go through my images, I move on to the shots I loved, but ultimately ended up not posting. Now we're getting into the duds, as I like to call them. This is where I look at the shots that I consider missed, shots that I ultimately didn't put in my portfolio. I mean, to give you a little background, I keep all of the images that I shoot and I delete nothing. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I keep it all. Looking back on your work is such a powerful tool for growth. It allows you to tangibly see what you're doing and it gives you ideas about how to improve. Similarly to how I evaluate my portfolio shots, I look back on the shots that I missed or feel need improvement, and I ask myself, was it a compositional error? Maybe something broke a leading line like a rock or a tree? Was it an error with the camera settings I had chosen? Or was my timing wrong? Was I just simply unprepared? These are all the questions that I'm asking myself as I go through them and list out the things that I feel made the shot a dud. And I actually even make little tally marks next to repeated errors. At the end of this, I look at which mistakes I made the most and consider those my areas of opportunity for the following year. One shot that really stung this year was a missed shot of Shining Cloud Falls. This is the most remote waterfall in Michigan's Porcupine Mountains wilderness, and reaching this location requires a full day's hike, carefully timed with the weather to ensure the best results. Of course, you can backpack in and set up camp back there, but being that it's such a popular spot, the little campsite back there is usually pretty booked. It was late July, biting black flies, mosquitoes, ticks, all those nasty insects that we want to avoid were all out in full force. It was 90 degrees that day, high humidity, rain was in the forecast, overcast skies. I decided today was the day I'm going to make the hike back to Shining Cloud. I was really hopeful that the incoming rain was going to add some depth to the rocks and the rugged terrain around the waterfall. A 2.5-hour hike and walking up the Big Carp River for a part of it, I finally arrived at the falls, and I was so excited to be back there that I just took out my gear and started moving from point to point looking for compositions. I stood right in the splash pool, I walked through the cascades, I even climbed up some smaller sections of it and took a swim in the falls when I was back there. It was an outstanding way to spend a day in the summer. One of my personal favorites. But, in my excitement, I was rushing to beat the rain. I could hear thunder in the distance, and the ominous gusts of wind blowing through the treetops overhead warned me that my time was running pretty short. In a rush, I shot a few variations of the falls, and ultimately only one of them worked. When I got back home and I looked at them on the computer, I realized that I had missed an erratic in the waterfall's outflow, which broke the leading line and blocked a portion of the falls. For those that aren't familiar, an erratic is just a really large boulder that was in the splash pool and it interrupted that leading line. Unlike the sunset shot where the boulder was a little less noticeable, this was just glaringly obvious. It was a tremendous disappointment, but it carried a valuable lesson relating back to my state of mind and how I'm approaching my hikes. Slow down, take your time, and check the shot. In 2024, one of my goals was composition and finding the not so obvious choices in the landscape. In order to achieve this, though, I needed to slow down. You need to ask yourself where the lines are, where's the positive and negative space in the image, and where's the weight in the scene. I broke the leading line and interrupted the visual flow of the image, ultimately ruining the shot. This tells me that although I saw improvements in some aspects, I need to continue working on composition and placement of elements within the scene. It's a process, and one that I think I'm making progress with. I don't feel defeated or disappointed with myself. These places are always going to be there, and there's always going to be another opportunity. I took the lessons learned, and I'm going to apply them here in 2025. As you look through your images, ask yourself the same questions. Is there something that you specifically want to focus on? Is there a habit that you want to break or a habit that you want to grow? Was there something easily avoidable that you just missed while you were there? Approach this with that growth mindset I mentioned earlier, and give yourself credit for trying. Understand that there's no such thing as a wasted trip, image, or experience. What works is an opportunity to learn, and what doesn't is an opportunity to grow. Don't let this discourage you. I assure you, pro, hobbyist, amateur, we are all the same. And believe it or not, our keeper rates are probably pretty similar. Now, as I move away from the duds, The final technical piece I'm looking at is my post-processing. And I'm specifically focusing on whether I brought the shot that I had envisioned to life. Do I feel like I left something on the table or that the edit could have been better? Did I take the right steps in the field to achieve the result that I wanted? One thing that I learned early on is that photography is a cycle. You start that cycle with inspiration. Inspiration leads to planning and preparing for a trip, which then leads to your field time and the photos you come home with. This all culminates in the digital darkroom and how you bring that experience and image to life. There's a piece in there, though, that goes right between planning and field time, and that's artistic vision. Your artistic vision is the foundation on which the image stands. Thinking about a scene and how you want it to look, planning how to achieve that look, and making intentional choices in the field to reach that goal are what I'm considering in this step of reflection. When I plan a trip, I'm thinking about the locations I want to visit while I'm there. Is there a waterfall scene? What do I need to make that shot happen? Is there an overlook that I want to capture at sunrise? Well, I know I'm probably going to need to bracket that to get my dynamic range right. Maybe there's a meadow of tall grasses that I'm going to hike and it would benefit from a shallow depth of field. Am I going to need a large aperture for that? Should I consider bringing 2.8 lenses or 1.8 lenses? When I look back over my year, I'm thinking about what I set out to do, what I accomplished, and whether there were any moments that I felt I was unprepared and could not reach my artistic vision. Getting it right in field is essential to getting it right in the digital darkroom. You can't add a circular polarizer in post-processing or saved clipped highlights or shadows. Your processing depends entirely on your artistic vision and the steps that you take to get it right in the field. As I look through the images I processed and consider my approach to processing, I'm asking myself what gear I used, what settings I used. I'm recalling moments in the darkroom where I thought I lost an image and why. I'm looking at the images that might have been clipped or that should have been bracketed or focus stacked. The missed shots tell me what I need to do better to prepare in the year ahead. The keepers tell me what I did right and help me continue to refine my process in the field. Mastering the digital darkroom leads to being more intentional in the field. Mastering the field craft leads to being more intentional in the digital darkroom. It's that cycle that I mentioned. They lean on each other, and as one improves, so does the other. Learning field craft and mastering it teaches you camera settings, composition, lighting, and shooting methods. Learning post-processing and bringing images to life teaches you the steps that you need to take while on location, the gear that you need, and the flow of the process. It's all a cycle. Through trial and error, you'll begin to see yourself grow. Learning what you need to make the image work and flow properly, processing and shooting go hand in hand in that regard. You will develop the ability to read a scene and get an idea of what it's going to look like before you even take the camera out of the bag. That's that artistic vision piece. Of course, it takes time to develop this, but I promise it becomes natural the more you practice it. However, my one word of caution here is to not take yourself out of the editing process. Avoid presets and just slapping filters on images. You need to be in control of the process from start to finish, field to darkroom. Presets, filter packs, all that stuff, it's a shortcut that takes you out of the process. And when it comes to photography, any shortcut that you think you're taking is actually the long way. The right way to do it is to just go through it. By using them, you remove yourself from the image, and the image ultimately loses its soul, if you will. If you can take a shot and edit it your way, your work becomes unique. It defines you, and it can stand on its own. Early in my photography journey, I had the pleasure of speaking with an established pro. I asked him, "What marks a professional photographer? What do you believe is the defining characteristic?" His response stuck with me and has been one of my motivating factors for years. He said, "Consistency. Repeatable results across a body of work, a uniform style, that's unique to that individual. I took that advice and I lived it, spending years learning different styles and editing techniques. Today, I believe I have a fairly well defined style, but again, I'm always looking to improve upon it and build on it. I want to learn new tricks and techniques to take it even further. When I look back across my year, this is what I'm looking for. Am I living into my style and my vision? Do I have a theme? Did I repeat my results under different conditions with different subjects across all my trips? If not, why? And if so, how do I continue to do that? Now, this ultimately comes down to a combination of things, the biggest and most important being the gear that you're using to create the images. Yes, I am a gear advocate, but with a caveat. You need to use what works best for you. Your gear should be the extension of your creativity, not the hindrance. I'm not encouraging you to go out and spend thousands on gear and new gizmos and gadgets. What I'm saying is to use what is going to get you the results that you want. If that's a 30-year-old film camera, you can use the thing blindfolded and it delivers the results that you're looking for. Perfect. If it's a 5-year-old digital camera that delivers the results you want, awesome. Something that you know you can rely on and trust to get you the image you need in the field and the data required in the darkroom to bring that image to life. That's all that matters. That brings us to gear. Once I've looked at my images from a technical standpoint, this is the last question before I bring everything together. The gear. What was I using? Was it serving me? Did I feel limited by it, or did I miss any shots because of it? Maybe I didn't have the right focal length to reach a distant scene, or I didn't have the right ND filter to reduce my exposure enough. Maybe the tripod wasn't tall enough or did not get short enough. Maybe the bag was uncomfortable and it made my hike miserable and I went back to the car. Whatever the case might be, I always consider this as the last step of reflecting on the previous year. This is the part of the process that I call dialing in your kit, finding what serves you and what doesn't, and what you can do to improve your in-the-field experience as you move into the next year. It took me years to get this right, and even today, sometimes I still feel that I could benefit from a little improvement. The thing to remember here is that your gear is evolutionary and it's going to change over time. What I have in my bag now in January is most likely going to change just a little bit, at least, by the end of 2025. That's perfectly normal, and it's part of the growth and learning cycle. As you learn more and experience more, you realize you need specific tools for specific shots. Don't buy something just because your favorite photographer uses it. Buy it because you have a need for it. Be cautious here, though. Gear acquisition syndrome is a thing, and it can put all kinds of wild thoughts into your head. Your gear is not the secret to great photography. It is strictly your vision. The way you are interpreting the scene, the light, the color, the composition. Most modern cameras are more than capable of capturing incredible images. Instead of chasing upgrades for the sake of upgrades, focus on refining your ability to tell stories through your photos and whether the gear that you're using is allowing you to do that. Evaluate the photos first and the gear second. If the gear is truly the limiting factor, research what you can do to resolve that, or what you can do to mitigate that. Some people say that gear's not important, and personally, I disagree. It absolutely is important. It is second only to the 12 inches behind it. But its importance is based purely on how well it serves your creative vision. Does it meet your needs? Are you getting the results that you want from it? If the answer is yes, then you are right where you need to be. If there's something about it that really bothers you or causes you to miss shots, then that's what you need to focus on. Understand, I'm not endorsing going out and keeping up with every new camera that's been released. Every new lens, filter, tripod, bag, that's enough to make you go broke and keep you there. What I'm saying is find the gear that works for you and embrace it. Use it until there's an actual need to upgrade, not a want. It took me a few years to dial in the combination of gear and support equipment that did work for me, but I don't plan on deviating from it for a while. Everything's dialed in to exactly what I need in the field. Once I realized I was getting my best images out of the kit that I have, I realized I had hit the pinnacle of gear for my needs. I even doubled down on the camera and bought a second body as a backup because I know full well that I'm going to have both of these for years and years to come. Of course, this is going to look different for everyone as well. Use what works best for you and has a genuine use case in your bag. If for no other reason, it saves pack weight, then that's a pretty big plus on long hikes. Considering this from a benchmark perspective, just ask yourself, does my gear serve me well? Am I getting the shots that I want? Why or why not? If the answer is yes, you've dialed in your kit and you're ready for the trails. If the answer is no, ask yourself what you need to accomplish your goals and what is going to get you there. For me, if I think about a piece of gear and I get that uneasy, anxious feeling, I know it's time to part with it and either replace it or simply do without it. Bringing this all together and going through this process, I bring all these pieces together by looking at each individually and how it relates to the next. Usually, I have at least one goal that carries over, and that's perfectly normal. We should always try to improve, and as long as we're constantly learning and seeking growth to dial in what it is that we're doing, we're progressing, and that's really all that matters. As you go through this process, remember this. Reflection is not about self-criticism. It is purely about learning. Feeling like your work is not good enough is actually a sign of growth. Becoming more critical of your own work guides you toward what is next, even if it is a little uncomfortable sometimes. By understanding your successes and shortcomings, you can make intentional adjustments in the future. Maybe you want to work on cleaning up your compositions. Maybe it's as simple as committing to getting up a little earlier to make sunrise and get that soft light in your scenes, or even just lightening your bag a little so that you're more comfortable and can hike further on the trails. Whatever the case might be, it's important to realize that this process enlightens you and shows you what you are doing well. It gives you ideas on how you can improve your craft. This whole process, start to finish, should be exciting and energizing. It should inspire you and motivate you to get out there and start the new year fresh. One last point I want to make before we close out the episode is collaboration. I cannot overstate the importance of shooting with others and spending time with those who share your passions. Photography does not have to be a solitary pursuit, but it also does not always have to be a group adventure either. Finding balance between these two can help you see things in a new light and teach you new techniques, perspectives, approaches, and methods, while also building quality connections with others. Working with other photographers of all skill sets has not only improved my skills and approach, but I've built some great friendships through sharing a mutual passion that have enriched my life and added meaning to my work. It's important to make time for yourself, but don't forget to build those friendships and spend time with others as well. As we all move into the new year together, I'm sure you may be asking yourself what I learned about myself in this. What are my goals and plans for the new year? Well, I decided to write a blog post outlining exactly that, and I linked it in the show notes below. The blog post is basically a condensed version of this episode with my list as an example at the end so that you can build from it, use it as a template, or make whatever changes are necessary for your year ahead. As you go through this process, or whichever process you feel works best for you, remember, continuous growth mindset. Growth is your motivation. We should always be eager to learn, grow, and be hungry for more. That is how we continue getting better and improving ourselves. Greek philosopher Plutarch once said, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." What he meant by this is simple. Our minds are not simply containers to be stuffed with endless information and memorization of random facts, figures, and everything else that's going on in our lives. Rather, they're an active entity that needs to be stimulated and explored, like a fire being kindled, emphasizing the importance of critical thinking and reflection, inspiration, exploring our natural curiosities, and independent exploration. It's a restless, constant, lifelong desire to keep on learning and growing. It's a mark of intelligence and one of the purest forms of self-care. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. Thank you all for joining me, my friends. See you in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody.